Richard Goodall won America's Got Talent and sang his heart out on national television, but now that rumors are spreading, something is wrong. The truth about what's happening to the singing janitor from Terre Haute is more complicated and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Some say it's a cautionary tale, while others fear it's the beginning of something darker. Simon Cowell saw a raw talent, but did the world see the full man? This is terrible, and if you think you know his story, think again. Long before the bright lights of Hollywood, Richard Goodall walked the dim hallways of Shanty Rose Middle School pushing a mop and humming old Journey tunes. To most people in Terre Haute, Indiana, he was just Mr. Richard, the janitor who kept the lights on. Richard wasn't born into music, he had no formal training, no money for lessons or professional gigs, and a strong connection to the songs he grew up with. In the privacy of his bedroom, he would sing for hours on end, letting the music take him somewhere else. However, after high school, college wasn't an option, bills came in quickly, and reality hit harder. Richard took a job at the local middle school and never left for 23 years. Richard continued to show up early in the mornings, late at night, and on snow days, but the job didn't sap his spirit, on the contrary, it gave his voice more purpose. Richard was the first person to make music feel personal for many children. Teachers noticed, too. Some said his voice could stop a room cold, while others admitted they came to work just to hear him sing before the morning bell. While the school heard him every day, few knew the depth of his love for music. Singing wasn't about chasing fame, but rather about connection. Every note was a release, every song was a lifeline, and most people outside of Terre Haute had no idea what was going on inside that school. Richard Goodall was quietly creating a legacy one hallway at a time, and while his world remained small, one song was about to. The video that changed everything began with a school assembly in 2022. It was ordinary and unmemorable until Richard Goodall took the mic and sang a song that was close to his heart, Don't Stop Believing, by Jury. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, in fact, he wasn't even scheduled to perform, but when he did, something changed in the room. A teaching assistant took out her phone, hit record, and recorded a performance that would go far beyond the school gym. She posted the clip on TikTok later that day, and within hours, the number of views skyrocketed into the hundreds of thousands. Then, something even more bizarre happened. Steve Perry, Jury's legendary frontman, left a comment that read, "I love this." Richard didn't believe it at first, thinking it might be fake, but it was real and it was happening. The Terre Haute community was shocked when the video went viral on Facebook groups, YouTube compilations, and Instagram Reels. They had always heard about the singing janitor, but now the rest of the world was paying attention. Some said it was because of the emotion in his voice, while others said it was because of the story behind it. Students who had once passed him in the hallway were now watching their janitor on the evening news, and parents who had only known him as the man who cleaned up after school events were now sharing the clip with their coworkers. Suddenly, Richard Goodall was more than just a school custodian, he was our Richard, the pride of Terre Haute. The town was buzzing with pride, cafes played his clip repeatedly, teachers sobbed, and they watched it again. Richard Goodall's TikTok video was about to take his quiet life into a world where most people don't know how to deal with rejection, resilience, and AGT triumph. Of course, Richard wasn't aware of it yet, but by the time the phone calls started, local journalists, national morning shows, and talent scouts were interested in him. However, Richard had already been down that path in 2009, when he had auditioned quietly and without much fanfare and was cut before anyone ever heard him sing. Years later, he submitted it to The Voice and received a cold email back, "Thank you for your audition, you won't be moving on." It hurt, but he continued to sing, so when America's Got Talent reached out again, he hesitated. He later acknowledged that he felt like he belonged on those stages, but Angie, his fiancée at the time, encouraged him to go for it, saying, "What have you got to lose?" He packed his bags, took his first flight to Los Angeles, and arrived with a cooler full of lunch meat and cottage cheese to save money on hotel meals. He chose Don't Stop the Golden Buzzer, believing that it wasn't a gamble, but rather his anthem. As his voice filled the theater, the judges leaned in, and the audience stood up, and when it hit the golden buzzer, Heidi Klum stood and slammed the button with both hands. Confetti rained down, and Richard stood in shock. "I never wanted to be famous, I just wanted to sing," he said softly into the microphone, blinking through tears. Simon Cowell called the performance unexpected and truly unforgettable. Off camera, Richard said, Cowell gave him a silent nod backstage without saying anything, just a look that said, "You earned this." From that point on, Richard wasn't just the viral janitor, he was a serious contender. The judges accepted him as more than just a novelty act, they saw his heart, his authenticity, and his depth. However, as his story spread, few people knew what it took to get there, the years of rejection, the silent doubts, and the decision to try again. As Richard entered the live shows, another test was ahead, because, despite his newfound fame, he still had to decide whether to return home. The same hallways, the same floors, the same job. Fame had arrived, but Richard hadn't left. To most people, this was unthinkable. How could someone go from being on national television to cleaning gum off lockers? But that's exactly what happened. Richard had won season 19, and his voice was celebrated all over the nation, but he still showed up for work on Monday morning as if it were just another day. There was no limo, no entourage, just Richard and a ring of school keys. "This is awful," one fan commented online, "I'm still me. This school, these kids, they're part of who I am." In Terre Haute, there were no photographers, just teachers greeting students and children shouting, "Mr. Richard" down the hall. Instead of treating him like a star, they treated him like a. Richard returned home not because he had to, but because he wanted to. His town didn't just watch him rise, they held him steady when the lights went out. Even Richard knew that this balance couldn't last forever because, while he remained rooted in his job, something was shifting, a choice was coming, and the demands of a rising society were coming. He was treated like family, the cafeteria served him his usual coffee, the 7th graders begged him to sing during lunch, and the students handed him the keys to the city for a surprise school rally. Before America knew Richard Goodall as the singing janitor, he was just Patricia Sue's husband and devoted partner. They spent 30 years together, weathering life's highs and lows with quiet strength. Their bond was deep and ordinary in the best way, and on June 19 of that year, Patricia passed away. Richard didn't make a press statement or hide anything. Instead, he turned to Instagram, where his followers were still modest and local, and said, "I'm so sorry," beneath a picture of her. Then, Angie wrote, "I did my best, but my best wasn't good enough." The post was raw like an open wound. Then came Angie. A year later, Richard shared a picture of him and a woman at a Mexican restaurant called Fun Night with My Lady at Taco Tequilas. They laughed a lot, and she encouraged him to keep singing. The emotional contrast was stark. Grief hadn't gone away, but now it shared space with hope. Richard continued to wear his pain, but he also wore a wedding ring. Most people don't know what's going on behind the smiles and the spotlight. They saw him sing confidently on TV, but they didn't see the quiet man backstage carrying a picture of Patricia in his pocket. Didn't realize that every note was layered with memories. Love had found him twice, once in comfort and once in chaos, and while the world applauded his new beginning, Richard Goodall didn't yet realize that the pressures of fame were about to collide with the still healing parts of his heart. Winning America's Got Talent undoubtedly brought Richard Goodall joy, but it also brought with it a silence that settles in after the applause fades. Most people don't understand what happens when you go from unknown to national headline in a matter of weeks, especially at almost 60 years old. Richard isn't a teenager trying to break into the music scene. He's buried a wife, worked decades in the same school, and now faces a completely different kind of pressure to stay relevant. When a person who already has emotional scars is suffocating, what appears to be a dream from the outside often weighs more than anyone realizes. Behind the red carpets and recorded interviews, there is a man who wakes up alone and asks himself, "I should be happy all the time, but sometimes I'm not." At school, students still greet him with hugs, and his community still beams with pride, but when he gets home, the noise stops, the rooms are quiet, and many nights end in front of a muted TV with no one to share the moment. The fame hasn't erased the loss, it hasn't made aging any easier, in fact, it's made reflection even more intense. Kept his voice to himself. There is pride, sadness, and a sense of loneliness for the time he lost waiting. He performs now in front of thousands of people, but in a strange way, he's never felt more alone. At his age, fame is both a gift and a ghost, and as he faces larger stages and rising expectations, the pressure increases because when the spotlight moves on, which it always does, what happens to the man who is still waiting for the lights to come back? Rumors, critics, and the FBI whispers. The glow of victory didn't last long. Almost immediately after Richard Goodall was crowned the winner of America's Got Talent, the whispers started. One viewer wrote, "Suddenly, the man who had just poured his soul into the mic was being picked apart by strangers online." Next came the rumors and comments about yet another singer winning the title, followed by blogs, Reddit threads, and TikToks that analyzed every performance and elevated karaoke. Some called it that, of course Don't Stop Believing made people emotional. It's not original. His supporters said, "This is terrible," as they watched a national treasure be dragged over song choices and perceived simplicity. However, the criticism didn't end with the music, it also raised concerns about AGT's performance history. Richard was the 8th singer to win in the show's 19 seasons. Were the judges, including Simon Cowell, favoritistic? They relied too much on feel-good stories rather than genuine innovation. Pondering whether America's Got Talent was more about ratings over talent. Then things became more sinister. Shortly after his AGT victory, an anonymous blog post claimed that Richard was involved in suspicious financial dealings related to a failed tech partnership. Within days, videos appeared online speculating that Richard had unknowingly endorsed a fraudulent investment platform connected to a small entertainment tech startup. Allegations surfaced that the company used Richard's name and image to lure in fan-based investors under false pretenses. The phrase FBI investigation began to appear in hashtags. Richard didn't reply to the rumors, his team released a brief statement denying any involvement in any illegal activity. Official charges were filed behind the scenes, but no formal investigation was carried out, and the damage was already done. Behind the scenes, people questioned how a school janitor went from golden buzzer to federal suspicion in a matter of months. Some people thought Richard was used and swept into a high-stakes scheme that he never understood, while others said he knew more than he let on. The most devoted fans pushed back hard, leaving him alone. Richard Goodall's story now walks a delicate line between inspiration and scandal, and with the pressure mounting and the facts still unclear, one question remains: can he survive? What comes next? A community rallies, GoFundMe, menopause, and the power of belief. When the headlines became harsh and the internet became loud, Terry Oat became more vocal in support while outsiders questioned his talent. When word got out that Richard Goodall couldn't afford to take his loved ones to the AGT finals, a local named Chris Burr started a GoFundMe page. The goal was modest, but in a matter of days, hundreds of people donated, many leaving notes like, "We believe in you and this town is behind you win or lose." Despite the rumors of scandals, Richard's hometown knew exactly who he was to them. He wasn't a controversy, he was family. When the local band returned home after their performance, the mayor gave Richard the key to the city schools, which had already closed. Banners were hung across Main Street, and the rally at West VO Middle School attracted a larger crowd than anyone had anticipated. Students chanted his name, teachers wept, and a child held a cardboard placard that said, "Our hero is our janitor." Then there was Menopause, the local band Richard had fronted covertly for years after his viral fame. They went from playing once a month to being booked every weekend, and local bars like Archie couldn't handle the demand. The group capitalized on the momentum by using their shows to raise money for music programs in local schools as well as to celebrate Richard's success. The same classrooms he had cleaned were now packed with children who wanted to sing because they saw someone who looked like them walk their halls and never stopped dreaming that there could be no scandal.